In a small, forgotten village, nestled between barren hills and dusty pathways, there lived a man named Yusuf. His hands were worn and calloused from years of labor under the unforgiving sun. Every morning, before the first light of dawn kissed the horizon, Yusuf would rise from his thin, threadbare mat, perform his ablution with water drawn from the village well, and stand in prayer. His voice, though quiet, trembled with sincerity as he whispered his dua to Allah, the Most Merciful, the Most Compassionate. Yusuf was not a man of wealth. He owned no land, no cattle, no gold hidden beneath the floorboards of his modest mud house. His home consisted of 2 small rooms, one where his family slept, and another where his wife, Amina, would cook their humble meals over a clay stove. The walls were cracked, and during the rainy season, water would seep through the roof, forming small puddles on the earthen floor. Yet, despite their poverty, there was something precious within those walls, something that no amount of gold could ever buy. That precious gift was their daughter, Zainab. Zainab was a child of 10 years, with bright, innocent eyes that sparkled like stars in the night sky. Her laughter was like the melody of a songbird, filling the silent corners of their home with warmth and joy. She had her mother's gentle smile and her father's unwavering faith. Even at such a young age, Zainab would sit beside her mother and listen intently as Amina recited stories from the High Quran. Stories of prophets who faced trials, of believers who remained patient, and of Allah's infinite mercy that descends upon those who trust Him. Amina, too, was a woman of deep faith. Her face bore the marks of hardship, lines etched by sleepless nights and days spent worrying about the next meal. Yet her eyes always shone with gratitude. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the distant hills, she would sit beside Zainab, gently combing her daughter's hair with her fingers, and whisper softly, "My child, we may not have much in this world, but we have Allah, and that is more than enough." Yusuf worked as a laborer in the nearby town. He would walk for miles each day, carrying heavy loads on his back, repairing roads, or assisting merchants with their goods. The pay was little, sometimes just enough to buy a few rotis and lentils for dinner. There were days when Yusuf would return home with empty pockets, his heart heavy with the weight of unfulfilled responsibilities. On those nights, he would sit outside under the vast star-filled sky, tears streaming down his weathered face, and he would raise his trembling hands toward the heavens. "Ya Allah," he would whisper, his voice breaking with emotion. "I am but a weak servant. I cannot provide for my family the way I wish I could, but I know you are the provider, the sustainer of all creation. I trust in your wisdom, Ya Rab. Please, do not let my daughter go to bed hungry. Please protect her from harm. I put all my hope in you alone." And Allah, the all-hearing, the all-knowing, would listen to the cries of his humble servant. Despite their struggles, Yusuf and Amina never allowed bitterness to enter their hearts. They never complained about their fate, nor did they envy the wealthy merchants who rode past their home on decorated horses. Instead, they taught Zainab the most valuable lesson a parent could ever give: Sabr and tawakkul, patience in times of hardship, and complete trust in Allah's divine plan. Little did they know, a storm was approaching, a trial so great that it would test the very foundation of their faith. But they also did not know that this trial would become the key to unlocking a destiny far greater than anything they could have ever imagined. For Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear, and those who remain patient, who hold firm to their faith even when the world seems dark and hopeless, are the ones whose stories are written in the annals of eternity. It was during the month of Shawwal, when the days were long and the heat unbearable, that the first signs of illness began to appear in young Zainab. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a common fever, something that would pass with rest, and perhaps a simple herbal remedy prepared by her mother. Amina would crush dried leaves and roots, mixing them with warm water, and gently coax her daughter to drink the bitter medicine. "Just a little more, my precious one," Amina would say softly, wiping the sweat from Zainab's burning forehead with a damp cloth. "This will make you feel better, inshallah." But as the days passed, Zainab's condition did not improve. Instead, it worsened. Her fever climbed higher and higher, and her once bright eyes grew dim and sunken. She could no longer play outside with the other children. She could no longer sit beside her mother and recite the verses of the Quran that she loved so dearly. Instead, she lay motionless on the thin mat, her small body trembling, with chills despite the sweltering heat that filled the room. Yusuf's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces each time he looked at his daughter. He would return home from his laborious work, his body aching and exhausted, only to find Zainab lying there, pale and weak, her breathing shallow and labored. He would kneel beside her, taking her tiny, fragile hand into his own rough, calloused palms, and he would whisper words of comfort. "My beloved daughter," he would say, his voice thick with emotion. "Do not fear. Allah is with you. He is the greatest healer. He will not abandon us." But deep within his heart, a terrible fear began to take root. What if Allah had decreed something different? What if this was a test he was not strong enough to bear? Amina too felt the crushing weight of helplessness. She would sit beside Zainab through the long, silent nights, her eyes red and swollen from countless tears. She would recite Ayat al-Kursi over and over again, her lips moving in fervent prayer, begging Allah to restore her daughter's health. Sometimes, in the darkest hours before Fajr, when the world was utterly still, Amina would place her forehead on the ground in prostration and weep uncontrollably. "Ya Allah," she would cry, her voice muffled by the earth beneath her. "She is my only child. She is the light of my life. Please, Ya Rab, do not take her from me. I know you are testing me, and I accept your test, but please, please have mercy on her. She is innocent. She has done no wrong. If there is any punishment to be given, take it from me instead." After several agonizing weeks, Yusuf made the difficult decision to take Zainab to the town's physician, a man known for his knowledge of medicines and treatments. It was a journey that required money they did not have, but Yusuf had no choice. He borrowed a small sum from a neighbor, promising to repay it as soon as he could, and carried Zainab in his arms all the way to the town. The physician, an elderly man with a long white beard and tired eyes, examined Zainab carefully. He checked her pulse, looked at her eyes, and listened to her breathing. After what felt like an eternity, he turned to Yusuf and shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, my friend," the physician said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "This illness, it is beyond my knowledge. I have seen it before, and I have never seen anyone recover from it. All I can tell you is to take her home, make her comfortable, and prepare yourself." Yusuf felt as though the ground beneath him had crumbled away. His knees buckled, and he had to steady himself against the wall. The physician's words echoed in his mind like a death sentence. Prepare yourself. What did that mean? How could a father ever prepare himself to lose his child? He carried Zainab back home in silence, his heart heavier than it had ever been. But even in that unbearable darkness, even as despair threatened to consume him entirely, a small flickering light of faith remained within his soul. "Allah is the best of planners," he whispered to himself, tears streaming down his face. "Whatever he has written for us, we will accept." The news of Zainab's illness spread through the village like wildfire. In small communities such as theirs, where everyone knew everyone else's struggles and joys, nothing remained hidden for long. The women would gather at the well in the early mornings, whispering among themselves as they filled their clay pots with water. Some spoke with genuine concern, offering prayers for the child's recovery. But others, those whose hearts had been hardened by envy and ignorance, spoke with cruel tongues. "What did they expect?" one woman said, her voice dripping with scorn. "They are so poor, they can barely feed themselves. How can they afford proper medicine for the girl? If Yusuf had worked harder, if he had been smarter with his money, perhaps this would not have happened." Another woman, adjusting her shawl with a self-righteous air, added, "I heard the physician himself said there is no hope. It is Allah's will, they say, but perhaps it is their own fault for living in such misery. Allah helps those who help themselves, does he not?" These words, though spoken in hushed tones, eventually reached the ears of Yusuf and Amina. Each cruel remark was like a dagger piercing their already wounded hearts. But they did not respond with anger. They did not defend themselves or argue with those who judged them so harshly. Instead, they turned inward toward the one who truly mattered, Allah, the most just, the most merciful. Yusuf would sit outside his home in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the distant hills, and he would reflect deeply on his situation. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting thoughts. Part of him wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. Why did some people live in comfort while he struggled every single day? Why did wealthy men sleep in soft beds while his daughter lay, dying on a thin, worn mat? Why, when he had always tried to be a good Muslim, to pray 5 times a day, to give charity even when he had almost nothing, why was he being tested so severely? But then, another voice would rise within him, a voice of faith, of remembrance, of the lessons he had learned from the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He remembered the story of Prophet Ayub, Job, who had lost everything, his wealth, his children, his health, and yet never stopped praising Allah. He remembered the verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, "And we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and a loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to the patient, who, when disaster strikes them, say, 'Indeed we belong to Allah, and indeed to Him we will return.'" Quran 2, 155, 156. Yusuf would close his eyes and repeat those sacred words over and over again, letting them sink deep into his soul. Indeed, we belong to Allah, and indeed to Him we will return. Amina too faced her own internal struggle. There were moments, dark, terrible moments in the middle of the night, when she would feel her faith wavering. She would look at Zainab's pale, fragile face and wonder if her prayers were even being heard. She would question whether she had done something wrong, whether she had failed as a mother, whether Allah was punishing her for some hidden sin she did not even know she had committed. But then, she would remember the words of her own mother, spoken to her many years ago when she herself was just a young girl. "My daughter, this world is not our home. It is merely a test, temporary stop on our journey to eternity. The real home, the real peace, awaits us with Allah, and those who remain patient in this life, who trust in His wisdom, even when they do not understand, will be rewarded beyond measure in the hereafter." Those words became Amina's anchor. Whenever doubt crept into her heart, she would hold on to them tightly, as a drowning person holds onto a lifeline. She would go to Zainab's side, gently stroke her daughter's burning forehead, and whisper softly, "My precious child, if Allah has written recovery for you, then no force on earth can harm you. And if He has written something else, then we will accept it with grace, for He knows what is best." And so, the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into a month. The village continued to whisper. The illness continued to ravage Zainab's frail body. But Yusuf and Amina continued to hold firm to their faith, their sabr, and their unwavering trust in Allah's divine plan. Little did they know, their patience was about to be rewarded in a way they could never have imagined. It was on a night unlike any other, a night when the sky was covered with thick, dark clouds, and the wind howled through the narrow streets of the village like the cries of a restless spirit. The air was heavy with the scent of approaching rain, and thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the very foundations of the small mud houses. Most villagers had bolted their doors and windows, seeking shelter from the storm that was about to unleash its fury. Yusuf sat beside Zainab, who had grown weaker with each passing day. Her breathing was now so faint that he had to lean close just to hear it. Amina sat on the other side, her lips moving silently in prayer, her hands clasped tightly together. The dim light of a single oil lamp flickered in the corner, casting long, dancing shadows on the cracked walls. Suddenly, through the roar of the wind and the distant rumble of thunder, there came a sound, a soft, deliberate knock on their wooden door. Yusuf and Amina looked at each other in surprise. Who could possibly be outside on a night like this? No one in the village would venture out in such dangerous weather. Perhaps it was a mistake, or perhaps the wind had blown something against the door. But then the knock came again, more insistent this time. Knock, knock, knock. Yusuf slowly rose to his feet, his heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He walked to the door and hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the wooden latch. Then, taking a deep breath, he pulled the door open. Standing before him was an old man, unlike anyone Yusuf had ever seen before. He was tall and thin, his back slightly bent with age, and he wore a simple, worn cloak that was drenched from the rain. His long white beard flowed down to his chest, and his eyes, his eyes, were deep and penetrating, as if they could see straight into the very soul of a person. Despite the storm raging around him, there was an inexplicable calmness about him, a serenity that seemed to radiate from his very being. "Assalamu alaikum," the old man said, his voice soft yet firm, like the gentle flow of a river. "Wa alaikum assalam," Yusuf replied, his voice filled with confusion and concern. "Please, come inside, sir. You should not be out in this storm." The old man nodded gratefully and stepped into the humble home. Water dripped from his cloak onto the earthen floor, but he did not seem to mind. Amina quickly brought a dry cloth and offered it to him, her hands trembling slightly. The old man accepted it with a kind smile and thanked her quietly. "Forgive us, honored guest," Yusuf said, his voice apologetic. "We have very little to offer you. We have no fine food, no comfortable place for you to rest, but whatever we have, it is yours." The old man raised his hand gently, stopping Yusuf mid-sentence. "My son," he said, his eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed to span centuries. "I did not come here for food or shelter. I came here because Allah guided my steps to your door. Tell me, what burden weighs so heavily upon your heart?" Yusuf felt his throat tighten with emotion. How did this stranger know? How could he possibly sense the agony that had been consuming them for weeks? Slowly, Yusuf gestured toward the corner of the room where Zainab lay, a small body barely visible beneath a thin blanket. "Our daughter," Yusuf said, his voice breaking. "She is very ill. The physicians have given up hope. We have prayed and prayed, but I do not know what more we can do." The old man walked slowly towards Zainab, his steps deliberate and purposeful. He knelt beside her and placed his weathered hand gently on her forehead. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply closed his eyes, his lips moving in silent prayer. The room fell into a profound silence. Even the storm outside seemed to quiet, as if the very heavens were listening. Then, the old man opened his eyes and looked up at Yusuf and Amina, who stood watching him with bated breath. "Tell me," he said softly, "do you truly believe in the power of Allah? Do you truly trust that He can change what seems impossible? Do you believe that when a servant calls upon Him with a sincere heart, He listens?" Tears welled up in Yusuf's eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I believe. With every fiber of my being, I believe." Amina too nodded, her own tears streaming down her face. "We have nothing left but our faith in Him," she said, her voice trembling. "He is our only hope." The old man smiled, a smile so warm and radiant that it seemed to fill the entire room with light. "Then listen carefully," he said, his voice now carrying a weight of divine authority. "Allah does not test His servants to destroy them. He tests them to elevate them, to purify them, to bring them closer to Him. Your sabr, your patience, your unwavering trust, all of this has been seen by the one who sees all. Continue to place your trust in Him. Pray to Him in the depths of the night, when the world is asleep and only He is awake. And know this, your daughter's Taqdeer is not yet written in stone. Allah can change it in the blink of an eye, for He is Al-Qadir, the All-Powerful." The old man's words hung in the air like a sacred promise, reverberating in the hearts of Yusuf and Amina long after he had spoken them. Before they could ask him anything more, who he was, where he had come from, how he knew of their suffering, the mysterious visitor rose to his feet with a grace that defied his apparent age. He placed his hand gently on Yusuf's shoulder, looked deeply into his eyes, and said one final thing. "Remember, my son, dua is the weapon of the believer. Use it. Pour your heart out before Allah in the darkest hours of the night, when no one else is watching, when it is just you and your Creator. That is when miracles happen." And with those words, the old man turned and walked toward the door. Yusuf rushed to follow him, wanting to offer him shelter for the night, wanting to know more, but when he opened the door and looked outside, the old man had vanished. The storm had passed, the rain had stopped, and the night sky, which had been filled with dark clouds just moments before, was now clear and dotted with countless stars, shimmering like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Yusuf stood there in stunned silence, his heart pounding. Who was that man? Was he a saint? A messenger sent by Allah Himself? Or perhaps he was something even more extraordinary, an angel in human form. Yusuf did not know, and perhaps he would never know. But what he did know, with absolute certainty, was that this encounter was not a coincidence. It was a sign, a reminder, a call to action. He closed the door slowly and turned back to face Amina, who sat with tears streaming. Down her face, her hands clutched to her chest. "Did you hear what he said?" Yusuf whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and determination. "He said that our dua can change everything. He said that Zainab's Taqdeer is not yet written in stone." Amina nodded, unable to speak, her throat choked with emotion. She looked at her husband, this man who had endured so much, who had worked himself to the bone every single day, who had never once complained or turned away from his faith, and she saw in his eyes a fire that had been rekindled, a fire of hope, a fire of surrender. "Tonight," Yusuf said firmly, his voice trembling with conviction, "we will pray like we have never prayed before. We will stand before Allah with complete humility, with complete trust, and we will ask Him, no, we will beg Him to heal our daughter, not because we deserve it, but because He is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, the most gracious, the most merciful." And so, as the village slept and the world around them fell into silence, Yusuf and Amina prepared themselves for the most important prayer of their lives. They performed their ablution with trembling hands, purifying themselves not just physically, but spiritually. They stood side by side in the small, dimly lit room, and they began to pray. They prayed Tahajjud, the voluntary night prayer that is beloved to Allah, the prayer that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said was the best prayer after the obligatory ones. It is the prayer offered in the depth of the night, when the world is asleep, when distractions fade away, when the connection between servant and creator becomes pure and unfiltered. Yusuf raised his hands toward the heavens, and with tears streaming down his weathered face, he began to speak from the very depths of his soul. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, O Most Merciful, O Most Compassionate, I stand before you tonight as the weakest of your servants. I have nothing to offer you except my broken heart and my unwavering faith. I do not understand why you have tested us in this way, but I trust in your infinite wisdom. I know that you do not burden a soul beyond what it can bear. I know that every difficulty carries within it a hidden blessing. His voice cracked with emotion, and he paused, trying to steady himself before continuing. Ya Allah, my daughter Zainab is your creation. She is a gift that you entrusted to us. If you wish to take her back, then she was always yours to begin with, and we will accept your decree. But Ya Rab, if there is even the slightest possibility, if it is written in your divine plan, please, please, grant her health, grant her life. Let her grow up to be a righteous servant of yours. I am not asking for wealth, for status, for comfort. I am only asking for my child's life. Beside him, Amina had collapsed into prostration, her forehead pressed firmly against the ground, her entire body shaking with sobs. She could not form coherent words anymore. All that came from her were raw, primal cries, the cries of a mother's heart breaking into a million pieces. Ya Allah, she wept, her voice muffled by the earth beneath her. I cannot live without her. She is my everything. She is the reason I wake up every morning. Please, Ya Rab, have mercy on us. Have mercy on her. They prayed for hours. They recited every dua they knew. They called upon Allah by his beautiful names, Al-Shafi, the healer, Al-Qadir, the all-powerful, Al-Mujib, the responder to prayers. They poured out every ounce of pain, every drop of fear, every fragment of hope that existed within their hearts. And then, in the final moments before dawn, as the first light of Fajr began to break through the darkness, Yusuf and Amina made their final, complete surrender. Whatever you decree, Ya Allah, we accept. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the small window of their humble home, painting the earthen walls with hues of soft gold and amber, Yusuf and Amina remained in prostration. Their bodies were exhausted, their eyes swollen from hours of weeping, but their hearts were filled with a peace they had never known before. It was the peace that comes only from complete surrender, from placing every burden, every worry, every fear into the hands of the one who controls all things. Slowly, Yusuf lifted his head from the ground. His knees ached from kneeling for so long, and his voice was hoarse from reciting countless prayers. He turned to look at Amina, who remained in sujood, her lips still moving in silent supplication. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. It is time for Fajr, he whispered softly. Amina raised her head, her face wet with tears, and nodded. Together, they stood and performed the Fajr prayer, their movements slow and deliberate, each prostration filled with profound gratitude. After completing the prayer, they sat in silence for a moment, both of them too emotionally drained to speak. Then, from the corner of the room, came a sound, a soft, weak sound that they had not heard in many days. It was a cough. Yusuf's heart stopped. He turned his head sharply toward the place where Zainab lay, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Zainab had moved. Just slightly, but she had moved. Her tiny hand, which had been lying limp and lifeless for weeks, had shifted. Her fingers twitched ever so slightly. Amina, Yusuf whispered urgently, his voice trembling. Look! Amina's eyes widened in disbelief. She scrambled to her feet and rushed to Zainab's side, falling to her knees beside the thin mat. With trembling hands, she reached out and touched her daughter's forehead, the same forehead that had been burning with fever for so long. And then, Amina gasped. Ya Allah, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. The fever was gone. Zainab's forehead was cool to the touch, not cold, but the healthy, normal warmth of a child who was sleeping peacefully. Amina placed her hand on Zainab's chest and felt the steady rise and fall of her breathing that was no longer shallow and labored, but deep and rhythmic. Yusuf, Amina cried, her voice breaking with overwhelming emotion. She is breathing normally. The fever, it is gone. Yusuf dropped to his knees beside them, his entire body trembling. He took Zainab's small hand in his own and brought it to his lips, kissing it gently. Tears streamed down his face, tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude so profound that it felt as though his heart might burst. Alhamdulillah, he whispered over and over again. Alhamdulillah, all praise is due to Allah. All praise is due to Allah alone. As if responding to her parents' voices, Zainab's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, very slowly, she opened her eyes. Those beautiful, innocent eyes that had been dim and lifeless for so long now sparkled with a clarity that took Yusuf and Amina's breath away. Zainab blinked a few times, adjusting to the soft morning light, and then she looked up at her parents. Abba, she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Ami. Amina let out a cry of joy and pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly, as if afraid that if she let go, this beautiful moment would disappear like a dream. She buried her face in Zainab's hair and wept with a depth of emotion that only a mother who has nearly lost her child could understand. My precious, precious child, Amina sobbed. You have come back to us. Allah has brought you back to us. Yusuf wrapped his arms around both of them, his tears mingling with theirs. The three of them sat there together, a small family in a small, humble home, embraced in a moment of divine mercy that transcended all worldly understanding. Outside, the village was beginning to wake. Roosters crowed in the distance. The sound of women drawing water from the well could be heard faintly. Life was resuming its normal rhythm. But inside that small mud house, something extraordinary had taken place. A miracle had occurred. Not the kind of miracle that makes headlines or is recorded in history books, but the kind of miracle that is witnessed only by those who truly believe, those who place their complete trust in Allah, even when all hope seems lost. Zainab, still weak but conscious, looked up at her father with confusion in her eyes. Abba, why are you crying? Yusuf let out a laugh mixed with tears and disbelief and overwhelming joy. These are not tears of sadness, my beloved daughter, he said, stroking her hair gently. These are tears of gratitude. Allah has answered our prayers. He has given you back to us. Zainab did not fully understand what had happened, but she could feel the love surrounding her, the warmth of her parents' embrace, and the peace that filled the room. She smiled, a small, tired smile, and whispered, I am hungry, Ami. Those simple words, I am hungry, were the most beautiful words Amina had ever heard, because they meant life, they meant recovery, they meant that her daughter was returning to her. I will make you something right away, my darling, Amina said, wiping her tears and laughing through her joy. I will make you the most delicious meal you have ever tasted. In the days and weeks that followed, Zainab's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Each morning, she grew stronger. Color returned to her cheeks, replacing the deathly pallor that had haunted her parents' dreams. Her laughter, which had been absent for so long, once again filled the corners of their humble home. She began to eat with appetite, to walk without trembling, and to recite the verses of the Quran that she loved so dearly alongside her mother. The village, which had whispered with cruel judgment just weeks before, now whispered with astonishment. The same women who had gathered at the well and spoken harshly about Yusuf and Amina now stood in shocked silence. They had all heard the physician's verdict that there was no hope, that the child would not survive. Yet here she was, not only alive but thriving, walking through the village streets with her mother, her eyes bright and full of life. Some came to Yusuf's door with shame written on their faces, offering belated apologies and half-hearted explanations for their earlier words. But Yusuf, whose heart had been purified through the fire of tribulation, bore no resentment. He welcomed them with kindness and humility. Do not apologize, he would say gently. We are all human. We all make mistakes. What matters is that Allah has shown His mercy, and for that we are eternally grateful. But the miracle that had unfolded within the walls of that small mud house did not end with Zainab's recovery. Allah, in His infinite wisdom and generosity, had written something far greater in their Taqdeer, something that neither Yusuf nor Amina could have ever imagined. One afternoon, as Yusuf was preparing to leave for his daily labor in the town, a well-dressed merchant came to his door. The man was riding a fine horse, and his clothes spoke of wealth and status. Yusuf greeted him with confusion, wondering what business such a man could possibly have with him. Assalamu alaikum, the merchant said, dismounting from his horse. Are you Yusuf, the laborer? Wa alaikum assalam, Yusuf replied cautiously. Yes, I am Yusuf. How may I help you, sir? The merchant smiled warmly. "I have heard about you and your family, about your daughter's miraculous recovery, and more importantly, about your character. The people in the town speak highly of your honesty, your hard work, and your integrity. I am in need of a trustworthy man to manage one of my shops in the town center. The position comes with a fair wage, enough to provide comfortably for your family. Would you be interested?" Yusuf stood frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. A job, a steady income, the ability to provide for his family without breaking his back under the scorching sun every single day? It seemed too good to be true. "Sir," Yusuf said, his voice trembling, "I am just a simple laborer. I have no education, no experience in managing a shop. Why would you choose me?" The merchant placed a hand on Yusuf's shoulder. "Because, my friend, I have learned over the years that honesty and good character are worth more than any amount of education or experience. Those can be taught, but a pure heart, that is a gift from Allah, and I believe you have that gift." Tears welled up in Yusuf's eyes. He could barely speak. All he could manage was a whispered, "Alhamdulillah." True to his word, the merchant hired Yusuf. Within weeks, Yusuf began working at the shop, and to everyone's surprise, including his own, he proved to be exceptionally skilled at managing the business. His honesty attracted customers, his kindness earned their loyalty, and his prayers for barakah, blessings, seemed to manifest in every transaction. The shop prospered, and with it, so did Yusuf's family. For the first time in their lives, Yusuf and Amina did not have to worry about where their next meal would come from. They were able to repair the cracks in their home, to buy warmer blankets for the winter, and even to give sadaqah, charity, to those who were less fortunate than themselves. Yusuf never forgot what it felt like to be poor, to be helpless, to be judged by others. And because of that, he made it his mission to help anyone who came to him in need. But beyond the material blessings, something even more profound had changed. Zainab, who had been at death's door, had not only recovered, but seemed to carry with her a special light, a spiritual radiance that touched everyone she met. She had a wisdom beyond her years, a kindness that seemed to flow effortlessly from her heart. It was as if her near-death experience had brought her closer to Allah in a way that most people never experience in their entire lives. People began to notice. They would see Zainab helping elderly neighbors, sharing her food with hungry children, and reciting Quran with a voice so pure and beautiful that it brought tears to the eyes of those who listened. She became a source of inspiration for the entire village, a living testimony to the power of Sabr, dua, and unwavering faith in Allah. Yusuf and Amina would often sit together in the evenings, watching their daughter play or recite Quran, and they would marvel at how drastically their lives had changed. "Do you remember?" Amina would whisper, "when we thought we had lost everything?" Yusuf would nod, his eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. "I remember, but Allah had a plan that was far greater than anything we could have imagined. He tested us not to break us, but to elevate us." Years passed like the gentle turning of pages in a sacred book. Zainab grew from a frail, sickly child into a strong, compassionate young woman whose very presence seemed to radiate the mercy and blessings of Allah. She had become known throughout the region, not for her beauty or wealth, but for her profound knowledge of the Quran, her unwavering devotion to prayer, and her tireless service to those in need. Young girls from neighboring villages would come to sit at her feet, listening as she recited verses and explained their meanings with a depth of understanding that left even the village elders in awe. She taught them not just the words of Allah, but the spirit behind those words, the importance of sabr in times of hardship, the power of sincere dua, and the absolute certainty that Allah never abandons those who place their trust in Him. Zainab never forgot the illness that had nearly claimed her life. In fact, she spoke of it often, not with bitterness or fear, but with profound gratitude. She would tell those who gathered around her that illness was not a punishment, it was a gift. Through it, Allah taught my parents, and through them, taught me, that this world is temporary, that our bodies are fragile, but our faith, our connection to our Creator, is eternal and unbreakable. Yusuf, now an elderly man with a white beard that reached his chest, continued to manage the merchant's shop with the same honesty and integrity that had earned him the position years ago. But he had also become something more, a spiritual guide for many in the community. Men would come to him seeking advice, asking him how he had maintained his faith during the darkest moments of his life, how he had found the strength to keep praying when all hope seemed lost. And Yusuf would always answer the same way. He would close his eyes, as if traveling back to that terrible night when Zainab lay dying, when the mysterious visitor had appeared at their door, when he and Amina had prostrated before Allah in the depths of the night and surrendered everything. "My brothers," he would say, his voice still strong despite his age, "I am not a special man. I am not a scholar or a saint. I am simply a servant of Allah who learned, through pain and suffering, that true strength does not come from our own abilities. It comes from recognizing our complete helplessness before Allah and then placing all our trust in Him. When you reach that point, when you have nothing left except your faith, that is when miracles happen. That is when Allah's mercy descends like rain upon parched earth." Amina too had become a pillar of wisdom in the community. Women would seek her counsel on matters of family, marriage, and raising children, and she would share with them the lessons she had learned through her own journey. "Never underestimate the power of a mother's dua," she would tell them, her eyes shining with the light of experience. "When you raise your hands in prayer for your children, when you weep before Allah in the silence of the night, know that every tear is counted, every supplication is heard. Allah may not answer in the way you expect or in the timing you desire, but He always answers, and His answer is always what is best for you, even if you cannot see it at the time." One evening, as the sun set behind the hills painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the entire family gathered together, Yusuf, Amina, and Zainab, now joined by Zainab's own husband and children. They sat together in the courtyard of their home, which was no longer the small, cracked mud house of years past, but a modest yet comfortable dwelling that reflected the blessings Allah had showered upon them. Zainab's children listened with wide eyes as their grandfather recounted the story of the illness, the mysterious visitor, the night of desperate prayer, and the miracle that followed. It was a story they had heard many times before, but one they never grew tired of hearing. "And so, my beloved grandchildren," Yusuf concluded, his voice filled with emotion, "always remember this: no matter how dark your circumstances may seem, no matter how impossible your situation appears, never lose faith in Allah. He is Al-Qadir, the all-powerful. He is Al-Latif, the most subtle, who works in ways we cannot comprehend. And He is Al-Wadud, the most loving, who cares for His servants more than we can ever imagine." The youngest grandchild, a boy of about 7 years old, looked up at his grandfather with innocent curiosity. "Dada, do you think the old man who came to your door that night was an angel?" Yusuf smiled and gently stroked the boy's head. "I do not know, my child. Perhaps he was, or perhaps he was simply a righteous servant whom Allah sent to remind us of what we needed to hear. But in the end, it does not matter who he was. What matters is the message he brought, that Allah listens, that prayers are answered, and that faith can move mountains." As the call to Maghrib prayer echoed from the nearby mosque, the family rose together to perform their ablution. As they stood in rows, grandfather, father, sons, and behind them, grandmother, mother, and daughters, they raised their hands in prayer, their voices united in praising the one who had guided them through darkness into light, who had transformed their suffering into blessings, and who had proven, time and time again, that He never abandons those who trust in Him. And so, the story of Yusuf, Amina, and Zainab became a legend passed down through generations, not because they were extraordinary people, but because they exemplified an extraordinary truth: that patience in the face of trials, complete trust in Allah's wisdom, and sincere prayers offered from a broken heart have the power to change destiny itself. For Allah says in the Quran, "Indeed, with hardship comes ease." Quran 94:6. And those who truly believe in this promise will never be disappointed. Alhamdulillah. All praise is due to Allah alone.